The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves across the moors of Whitley Cross, that liminal hour between afternoon and evening, when the world seemed to hold its breath. Maren Holloway stood at the edge of her modest vegetable garden, surveying the meager harvest with practiced resignation. 18 months of widowhood had taught her many things. Chief among them, that dignity cost nothing, but pride cost everything. At 24, she had already buried a husband, sold her wedding silver, and learned to patch her own boots. Tobias had been kind, but impractical. A dreamer who'd left her with a stone cottage, a stubborn goat, and precisely 11 pounds to her name. The village whispered about her, of course, the young widow who kept to herself, who refused the local butcher's clumsy proposal, who walked the moors at odd hours as if searching for something she'd lost. They weren't entirely wrong about that last part. She was pulling the last of the turnips when she heard it. A horse's scream, high and terrible, echoing from Bellamy Woods, not a quarter-mile distant. Then silence, somehow worse than the cry itself. Maren didn't think. She simply ran. The undergrowth tore at her skirts as she pushed through the tree line, following the fading echoes until she found him. A stallion, magnificent even in distress, coal-black with a single white blaze across his forehead. He'd caught his foreleg in a poacher's snare, the cruel wire cutting deep into the flesh above his hoof. Blood darkened the leaves beneath him, and his eyes rolled with panic as she approached. "Easy now," Maren murmured, her voice dropping to the low, steady tone her father had used with frightened animals before consumption had claimed him. "Easy, beautiful boy. I'm not here to hurt you." The stallion's nostrils flared, but something in her manner made him still. She moved closer until she could see the full extent of the damage. The wire had cut nearly to the bone. Without treatment, infection would set in within days. "Not today," she whispered fiercely. "Not if I have anything to say about it." She'd helped her father treat injured horses during her childhood. The knowledge lived in her hand still. She retrieved the small knife from her pocket and began carefully cutting away the wire, speaking nonsense words of comfort while the stallion trembled beneath her touch. The wire came free, and Maren immediately pressed her shawl against the wound to slow the bleeding. The stallion whickered softly, gratitude evident in those dark, intelligent eyes. She was so focused on the horse that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until a shadow fell across them both. "What in God's name do you think you're doing to my horse?" The voice was cold, aristocratic, and sharp enough to cut glass. Maren looked up and found herself staring at the most forbidding man she'd ever encountered. He sat astride a chestnut mare, dressed in riding clothes that probably cost more than her cottage. His features were stark, almost severe, cheekbones carved from moorland granite, and eyes the color of winter storms. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and everything about him radiated barely contained intensity. The Duke of Thornmere. Everyone in 3 counties knew Corwin Vane by reputation, wealthy beyond measure, temperamental, unmarried despite a decade of matchmaking. The villagers called him the Black Duke, though never to his face. "I'm saving his life," Maren said flatly. "He was caught in a poacher's snare. The wound needs cleaning, or he'll lose the leg." Something shifted in those gray eyes. "And you have experience with such injuries?" "My father was a horse breeder. This isn't my first wire wound." She returned her attention to the stallion. "If you've quite finished looming, I could use assistance getting him somewhere I can treat him properly." A long pause followed. "You're giving orders to a duke." "I'm giving orders to someone whose horse is bleeding. Titles don't matter when there's a life at stake." His lips twitched, annoyance or something else entirely. "You live nearby?" "A cottage past the meadow, perhaps 10 minutes for a man. Longer for an injured horse." The Duke crouched beside her, examining the wound with surprising expertise. His hands were gentle, and the horse calmed further at his touch. "Tempest," he murmured tenderly. "What have you gotten yourself into?" "Fitting name," He earned it. He looked at her directly, and the full force of his attention was startling. "What's your name?" "Marin Holloway." "Holloway," he frowned. "Tobias Holloway's widow? You knew my husband?" "I knew of him. He purchased feed from my estate." A pause. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words were perfunctory, but something genuine lay beneath them. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. "Can you treat Tempest properly, Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes." "Then I have a proposition that will sound utterly mad." Those words, utterly mad, carried weight. Something significant, something perilous. "I'm listening," she said carefully. "Tempest is more than a horse to me. He's been my companion for 7 years." The Duke's gaze held hers. "Come to Thornmere Hall. Stay until he's fully healed. I'll provide everything you need, and compensate you handsomely." "Stay at your estate? A widow under a bachelor's roof? That's entirely improper." "My aunt, Lady Philippa Vane, resides with me. She'll serve as chaperone." His expression didn't waver. "I'm asking you to save my horse. The rest is logistics." She should refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to decline, but she looked at Tempest, at the trust in his dark eyes, and she thought of her cottage with its leaking roof, her dwindling funds, the approaching winter. "How long would you expect me to stay?" "Until Tempest is fully recovered. A month, perhaps more." "And the compensation?" He named a sum that made her breath catch. Enough to repair her roof, stock provisions for winter, perhaps set something aside. "That's far too generous for nursing a horse." "Tempest isn't just a horse." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming. "And I suspect you're not just a widow." Before she could demand what he meant, Tempest whickered softly, pressing his nose against her shoulder. "Very well," she heard herself say. "I'll come to Thornmere Hall." His smile was slight, but transformed his severe features into something almost beautiful, almost perilous. "Excellent. I'll send a carriage tomorrow morning." Those storm-gray eyes held secrets she couldn't fathom. "I think we're going to understand each other very well." He rode away into the autumn dusk, leaving Marin standing alone in the darkening woods, her pulse quickening with something she hadn't felt in 18 months. Fear, perhaps, or anticipation, or something far more treacherous than either. The carriage that arrived the following morning was obscenely fine, black lacquered wood with silver trim and the Vane family crest on the doors. It looked absurdly out of place in her muddy yard. She'd spent the night in sleepless turmoil, arguing with herself about the wisdom of this arrangement. By dawn, she'd reached reluctant peace. The Duke wanted his horse healed. She needed money. Simple commerce. Except nothing about Corwin Vane felt simple. Thornmere Hall emerged from the mist, like something from a fever dream. The estate was enormous, a sprawling Gothic masterpiece of gray stone and mullioned windows that seemed to grow from the moorland itself. Towers pierced the clouds, and gargoyles watched her approach with stone eyes that felt disturbingly aware. She was escorted to a guest suite in the east wing. The rooms were beautiful. Shades of sage and cream, a canopied bed large enough for 4, windows overlooking the famous Thornmere Gardens. "His Grace thought you'd be comfortable here," the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, explained. "Close to the stables, private enough for propriety." "It's far too fine. I'm here to work, not play at being a lady." His Grace was quite specific. Mrs. Pemberton's expression suggested arguing was pointless. An hour later, Marin stood in magnificent stables, face to face with an agitated Tempest and a frustrated Duke. "He bit the groom," Corwin said. "Drew blood. He's never done that before. He's in pain and frightened. Animals remember who helped them." She approached the stall slowly. "That would require you to step back, Your Grace. You're radiating tension." "I'm radiating tension. Like a thundercloud before lightning. If you can't be calm, you should leave." For a moment, she thought he might argue. Then something shifted, almost impressed, and he stepped back. "By all means, Mrs. Holloway. Show me how it's done." She entered the stall, speaking softly. Tempest's nostrils flared, but then recognition dawned, and he pushed his head against her shoulder. "There you are," she murmured. "Let's look at that leg." The wound was worse than she'd feared. Infection had already begun. She'd need to clean it thoroughly and pray they'd caught it in time. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and space without an audience. I'm not leaving." "Then stay quiet." The next hour tested her skills and Tempest's patience. The stallion flinched and trembled, but never kicked. He seemed to understand she was helping. Throughout, the Duke watched in silence. She felt his gaze, intense and unreadable. When the wound was finally dressed, Tempest released a long breath. "He'll need this change twice daily," Marin said. "No riding for a month." A month without riding Tempest? That's significant. The alternative is losing him entirely. Pain flickered across his features, quickly suppressed. "You genuinely care about his welfare." "Of course I care. Why wouldn't I?" "Because most people care about what they can gain, not what they can give." He moved closer, studying her. "You're an unusual woman. And you're an unusual Duke. I've heard you described as cold and temperamental, yet you clearly love this horse." "Tempest has never disappointed me, unlike most humans." "That's a bleak view of humanity." "It's an accurate one." His eyes met hers, and she saw shadows there, old wounds carefully concealed. Present company potentially accepted. Before she could respond, a sharp voice echoed through the stables. "Corwin, what is the meaning of this?" A woman bore down on them like an approaching storm, perhaps 60, dressed in immaculate purple silk, silver hair elaborately arranged. Despite her age, she moved with purposeful energy. "Aunt Philippa," the Duke said, remarkably unperturbed. "Allow me to introduce Mrs. Marin Holloway. She's staying with us." "Staying with us?" Lady Philippa's gaze swept over Marin with devastating thoroughness. "I assumed your note was a jest." "I never jest about Tempest." "You never jest about anything." Lady Philippa turned to Marin. "Mrs. Holloway, Tobias Holloway's widow?" "Yes, my lady." "I knew your mother-in-law. She was considered quite respectable." The implication being that Marin was considerably less so. "Aunt Philippa," the Duke interrupted, "Mrs. Holloway saved Tempest's life. She'll be treated with courtesy." Lady Philippa studied her nephew for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, but I intend to be vigilant." Her gaze returned to Marin. "I'll be watching you." "I would expect nothing less, my lady." After Lady Philippa departed, Corwin almost smiled. "My aunt can be formidable. Don't let her intimidate you." "With respect, Your Grace, I've survived poverty, widowhood, and a goat who learned to open latches. Lady Philippa doesn't frighten me." That surprised a laugh from him, genuine and transformative. "A resourceful goat? Her name is Barnaby. She's terrible, but she's mine." "You named your female goat Barnaby?" "She didn't seem like a daisy." He laughed again, and Marin felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a treacherous feeling. "I should warn you," he said, sobering. "There are those who won't approve of your presence, people who might try to make your position uncomfortable." "Why warn me?" "Because you saved Tempest." He held her gaze with unsettling intensity. "And because I find that I want you to stay." He left before she could respond. Marin stood alone with the horse, her thoughts spinning. What had she walked into? The first week passed in routine and unexpected revelations. Marin spent her days with Tempest, whose wound was healing better than she'd dared hope. What she hadn't expected was how much time the Duke himself spent there. Corwin appeared each morning, watching her work with attention that made her self-conscious. He asked questions about her methods, her training. He listened with genuine interest. "You're staring again," she said on the 7th morning. "I'm observing. You're making me nervous. You don't seem easily made nervous." She glanced up to find him leaning against the stall door, that hint of a smile at his lips. "You'd be surprised what makes me nervous." "Tell me." "Why?" "Because I've watched you deflect every personal question with remarkable skill. You know a great deal about me, but I know almost nothing about you. There isn't much to know." "I doubt that." His voice dropped. "Your marriage was considered beneath your station. Your father was a gentleman. Yet you married Tobias Holloway, a man with no fortune. You've been investigating me. I've been asking questions. I'm married for love," she said simply. "My family was furious. My mother still doesn't speak to me. And now she has grounds for vindication. Your husband left you nothing. He left me memories of being genuinely happy, more than most marriages provide." The Duke was quiet. When he spoke, something raw lay beneath the aristocratic control. "You loved him. With everything I had. And now? Now I survive. That's what widows do." He studied her with that penetrating gaze, and she had the sensation of being truly seen. "Have dinner with me tonight, in the dining room. My aunt will be present, but I'm tired of eating in silence. I've been taking meals in my room. It stops tonight. Consider it part of your duties." That evening, dinner was everything Maren had dreaded. She dressed in her best gown, deep green silk, fashionable 3 years ago, merely respectable now. Lady Philippa had surveyed her critically, and surprisingly, offered a pearl necklace. "You're representing Thornmere tonight. We may as well make you presentable." The guests had arrived with barely concealed curiosity. Maren felt their eyes throughout the soup course. "Mrs. Holloway," Lady Ashford said with saccharine interest, "I understand you're here to nurse the Duke's horse. How charitable." "Tempest requires specialized care. I have experience." "Your father was involved with horses, wasn't he?" Sir Geoffrey Holt's tone made the occupation sound shameful. "Trade adjacent. My father was a gentleman breeder. His horses won at Ascot 3 years running. Before he lost everything, of course." Lord Ashford smiled unpleasantly. "Gambling debts." Maren's spine stiffened, but Corwin's voice cut across the table like a blade. "Mrs. Holloway's father was one of the finest horsemen in 3 counties. His financial difficulties resulted from trusting the wrong partner, not personal vice. Misplaced loyalty is more honorable than deliberate cruelty." Lord Ashford flushed. "I meant no offense." "Then I'm certain Mrs. Holloway will overlook it." Sir Geoffrey's eyes lingered on Maren. "I don't suppose you've considered remarrying. A woman of your age might find opportunities if she were flexible about expectations." The implication was vile. Heat rose in her cheeks. "Mrs. Holloway's personal life is not a suitable dinner topic," Corwin said dangerously. "Unless you'd like to discuss your own romantic disappointments, Sir Geoffrey. Your last proposal was rejected quite publicly." Sir Geoffrey went pale. The dinner concluded in strained civility. Afterward, Maren fled to the gardens, desperate for air. She found a bench and sat trembling with suppressed emotion. "You're shaking." The Duke emerged from the shadows. "I'm fine." "You're not." He sat beside her without invitation. "Sir Geoffrey is a boor. I apologize for subjecting you to their company." "Why did you invite them?" "They invited themselves." He was quiet. "You handled it well." "I nearly threw wine in Sir Geoffrey's face. That would have been justified. And entertaining." Maren laughed despite herself, a watery sound. "You're not like them," he said softly. "The social climbers. You say what you think. It's refreshing. Or foolish. The line between refreshing and foolish is thinner than most realize." He reached out, brushing hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. "Why didn't you marry again?" "I didn't want someone. I wanted Tobias. And now? Now I don't know what I want. Everything I thought I understood has proven false. That's lonely? Perhaps. But it's honest. He was silent, his hand still lingering near her face. The air between them felt charged. I know something about loneliness, he said finally, and about building walls to survive. Then why build them? Because the alternative seemed worse. His eyes held hers with devastating intensity. Until recently. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Footsteps on gravel made them spring apart. Your Grace? A footman approached with obvious reluctance. A visitor has arrived. She says she's your betrothed. Marin's stomach dropped. Corwin's expression hardened. That's impossible. She's quite insistent. Lady Honoria Whitmore. She's brought her father. Corwin stood abruptly. When he looked at Marin, his eyes held something that might have been apology. This isn't what you think. What I think doesn't matter. I'm here to treat your horse. She walked away, her chest constricting with feelings she had no right to feel. Marin didn't sleep that night. By morning, she'd resolved to leave. The arrangement had been about healing Tempest. Another week or two, and he'd be ready for gentle exercise. She could give instructions to the grooms, collect her payment, and return to her lonely, sensible life. She was packing when Lady Philippa arrived, looking troubled. I assume you've heard about our visitor. The footman mentioned it. Lady Honoria Whitmore. Her father claims there's been an understanding between families for years. Marin kept her expression neutral. And is there truth to the claim? There was discussion many years ago, but nothing formalized. After the old Duke's death, Corwin refused emphatically. Then why is she here? Lord Whitmore is desperate. His estates are failing. A connection to Thornmere would solve everything. Lady Philippa's voice hardened. Lady Honoria is beautiful, accomplished, and entirely without scruples. She wants to be a duchess, and she doesn't take rejection gracefully. Why tell me this? Because I've seen the way my nephew looks at you, and the way you look at him. Whatever is developing, Lady Honoria will see it too. She'll use it against you. Lady Honoria Whitmore was stunning. Tall, willowy, golden hair, spring green eyes. She glided into the stables as if she owned them, her gaze sweeping past Marin with barely concealed dismissal. Your Grace, I've been searching everywhere. She placed a proprietary hand on Corwin's arm. Your aunt mentioned your horse was injured. How dreadful. Tempest is recovering well. Mrs. Holloway has been treating him. Mrs. Holloway? Lady Honoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. How charitable of Corwin to provide employment for the less fortunate. Mrs. Holloway is a skilled healer, Corwin said sharply. Of course. Lady Honoria's tone implied precisely the opposite, though one does wonder at the propriety. The following days were torture. Lady Honoria established herself at Thornmere with the determination of an invading army. Everywhere Marin turned, the woman was there, at breakfast, at dinner, in the gardens. She threw herself into caring for Tempest with fierce intensity. You're not eating, Lady Philippa observed one evening. I'm not hungry. Liar. You're hiding. The horse is nearly healed. Another week and he won't need me at all. He's fighting it, you know, Lady Philippa said. Whatever she's planning. But Lord Whitmore has powerful friends. Then perhaps Corwin should marry her. She'd make a suitable duchess. She'd make him miserable. She doesn't want him. She wants his title. Lady Philippa's eyes sharpened. You love him. I'm going to finish treating Tempest and return to my cottage. Plans change. Not this one. She was preparing for bed when she heard the knock. Soft, urgent, forbidden. She opened the door to find Corwin, his expression wild and desperate. I can't do this, he said. I can't marry her. Your Grace. Don't call me that. He pushed into her room, pacing. Not when everything is falling apart. You shouldn't be here. I know. But I couldn't stay away. Not when tomorrow they expect me to announce an engagement that would destroy me. Corwin, I love you. The words fell between them like stones into still water. I've been fighting it for weeks, but I can't fight anymore. She felt tears spilling. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. He crossed to her, cupping her face. I know you're not from my world. I know society will whisper. But none of that matters. I'm a widow, with nothing to offer. You've offered me more in 3 weeks than anyone has in a lifetime. His thumbs brushed away her tears. You see me, Maren. Not the title. Me. I can't be a duchess. I don't want a duchess. I want you. She kissed him. It was consuming, everything she'd been denying. His arms came around her, and she felt his heart hammering against her own. When they broke apart, he looked at her with wonder. Is that a yes? That's an, I love you too, you impossible man. They stood tangled together, the world temporarily irrelevant. But tomorrow would come. The morning of Lord Whitmore's dinner party dawned gray and threatening, clouds massing over the moors like soldiers preparing for battle. Maren was dressing when the commotion began. Shouts from the stables, running footsteps, the clatter of activity that signaled crisis. She flew downstairs without thought, dread pooling in her stomach. Tempest lay on his side, breathing shallow, foam flecking his muzzle. His body trembled with violent spasms, and his eyes had gone glassy and unfocused. What happened? She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already moving over his body, searching for answers. We don't know, the head groom said, his face ashen. He was fine at morning check, eating well, spirits well. Then an hour later, he just collapsed. Maren examined him with desperate intensity. Dilated pupils, erratic heartbeat, labored breathing. The symptoms arranged themselves into a pattern she recognized with sickening clarity. He's been poisoned. Foxglove, most likely. It attacks the heart. Poisoned? Corwin appeared at her side, his face drained of color. That's impossible. Who would? I don't know who. But I know what. She was already rattling off instructions, purging agents, supportive care, anything that might buy them time. We need to act now, or we'll lose him. The next 2 hours blurred into a nightmare of desperate effort. Maren worked with single-minded focus, forcing remedies down Tempest's throat, monitoring his weakening heartbeat, praying silently with every passing minute. Corwin stayed at her side throughout, following her instructions without question, his hands steady even as his eyes betrayed his terror. When Tempest finally stabilized, breathing still shallow but no longer labored, heart rhythm steadying, Maren sat back on her heels and allowed herself to breathe. He's not safe yet, she said quietly, but the worst may be over. Relief washed across Corwin's features, followed immediately by something harder, colder. Someone did this deliberately, he said. It wasn't a question. The dosage was careful, enough to kill slowly, to look like natural failure. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. His jaw tightened. Lady Honoria knew Tempest was the reason you stayed. Remove the horse. Remove you. Before Maren could respond, Lord Whitmore appeared in the stable doorway, his expression a mask of irritation. This is most inconvenient. The dinner party begins in an hour. The announcement must proceed as planned. My horse was nearly murdered, Corwin said, his voice deadly calm. There will be no announcement. We had an agreement. We had nothing. A conversation between our fathers decades ago does not constitute an engagement. I will not marry your daughter. Not now. Not ever. Lord Whitmore's face mottled with rage. You'll regret this. I have friends in Parliament. I can make your reform efforts very difficult. Threaten me again, Corwin said softly, and see what happens. Lord Whitmore looked between Corwin and Maren, and understanding twisted his features into something ugly. So that's how it is. The Duke and the widow. His laugh was vicious. You've traded my daughter for this? A fortune hunter in worn boots? Get out of my stables. When word spreads that you've rejected Honoria for a penniless nobody, society will— I said, get out! Lord Whitmore retreated, but his expression promised retribution. That night, Maren slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of Tempest dying, of Corwin being taken from her, of everything falling apart. She woke before dawn to pounding on her door. Lady Philippa stood in the corridor, white-faced and trembling in a way Maren had never seen. You need to come. Now. Tempest. Not Tempest. The older woman's voice cracked. Corwin confronted Lady Honoria about the poisoning. There was a scene. Accusations were made. Lord Whitmore demanded satisfaction. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Satisfaction? You mean a duel? At dawn. They're meeting at Blackmore Meadow. That's illegal. Since when has that stopped men in their pride? Lady Philippa gripped her arm with surprising strength. We need to stop this before someone dies. The ride to Blackmore Meadow was the longest of Maren's life. She'd stolen a horse from the stables, propriety abandoned entirely. The wind tore at her hair and stung her eyes, but she barely noticed. Every hoofbeat felt like a countdown, every second stretched into eternity. Please, she thought. Please let me be in time. The meadow emerged from the morning mist like a stage set for tragedy. Two groups of men stood at opposite ends of the field, their figures ghostly in the pale light. Seconds and witnesses, she realized dimly. The formal machinery of ritualized murder. And in the center, Corwin and Lord Whitmore, facing each other with pistols drawn. Stop! Her scream echoed across the meadow as she flung herself from the horse. Both men turned, their expressions shifting from concentration to shock. Maren, no! Corwin started forward, but she was already running. She placed herself directly between them, chest heaving, hands raised. This ends now. Mrs. Holloway, remove yourself! Lord Whitmore's voice dripped contempt. This is a matter between gentlemen. There's nothing gentle about this. She faced him with all the fury she possessed. You're willing to die over wounded pride, to kill a man because he refused to marry your daughter. My family's honor. Your daughter poisoned his horse to eliminate me as a rival. She's cruel and calculating, and would have made his life a misery. You should be grateful he refused her. She turned to Corwin, her voice breaking. And you. You cannot throw away everything. Your work in Parliament, your estates, your future, on a meaningless duel. Think of everyone who depends on you. Think of the reforms you're fighting for. Think of you, he finished quietly. I'm thinking of you. He insulted you. Called you things I won't repeat. Words are just words. They can't hurt me unless I let them. She reached for his hand, ignoring the shocked murmurs from the witnesses. Please, Corwin, put down the pistol. Walk away with me. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Maren could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every gaze upon them. Corwin's eyes searched her face, and she saw the struggle there. Honor against love. Pride against practicality. Everything he'd been taught against everything he felt. Then his hand opened, and the pistol dropped to the grass. This duel is over, he said. Lord Whitmore, take your daughter and leave my county. If I see either of you again, there will be consequences far worse than a bullet. For a terrible moment, Lord Whitmore's pistol remained raised. Maren's breath stopped entirely. Then Lady Philippa's carriage arrived, and from it emerged not only the dowager, but also the local magistrate. Lord Whitmore. The magistrate's voice was ice. Dueling is illegal in England. Lower your weapon and depart before I'm forced to arrest you. Lord Whitmore's defiance crumbled. He lowered his pistol, shot Marin a look of pure hatred, and retreated to his waiting carriage. Within minutes, he was gone. Marin's knees buckled. Corwin caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her against him with fierce strength. She could feel his heartbeat racing against hers, proof that he was alive, unharmed, hers. "You impossible woman," he murmured into her hair. "You wonderful, terrifying, impossible woman." You were going to duel him. He called you unspeakable things. And dying would have helped that how exactly? She pulled back to glare at him through her tears. "I can't lose you. Do you understand? I've already buried one man I loved. I will not do it again." His expression softened entirely. "You love me." "Of course I love you, you infuriating man. Why else would I ride across the moors at dawn and throw myself in front of loaded weapons?" He laughed, a sound of pure, overwhelming relief, and kissed her. Right there, in front of Lady Philippa and the magistrate, and God and everyone. A kiss that declared everything words couldn't capture. 3 months later, the wedding was held in Thornmere's chapel on a crisp winter morning, small and intimate despite the grandeur of the setting. Snow dusted the Gothic spires, and candlelight glowed warm through the ancient windows. Lady Philippa wept throughout the ceremony, though she would later deny it vigorously. Barnaby the goat, retrieved from Marin's cottage and now installed in the estate's gardens, managed to escape her enclosure and eat half the reception flowers before being apprehended by 3 footmen. Marin wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with the Vane family pearls at her throat, a gift from Lady Philippa that carried more meaning than either woman could articulate. Corwin wore an expression of pure, unguarded happiness that made several guests whisper they'd never seen him smile like that. The scandal Lord Whitmore had promised never materialized with the force he'd intended. The Duke of Thornmere's reform work had earned him powerful allies, and when the poisoning attempt on Tempest became known, Lady Honoria found herself persona non grata in every respectable drawing room. The Whitmores retreated to the continent in disgrace, and no one mourned their absence. As evening fell on their wedding day, Corwin pulled Marin aside into the library, their library now. "I have something for you." He handed her a folded document. A wedding gift. She opened it, scanning the contents. Her eyes widened. It was a trust deed establishing permanent income for her family, managed independently of their marriage, enough to maintain her parents' comfort, to provide for any siblings, to ensure they would never want again. "This is insurance," he said quietly, "so you'll never have to wonder if you married me for money. This is yours, regardless of what happens between us. If our marriage flourishes, and I fully intend that it will, this gives your family security without being tied to my goodwill. Either way, that burden is lifted." She looked at this man, this complicated, passionate, unexpectedly tender man, and felt her heart overflow. "You impossible, wonderful man." She threw her arms around him. "How did I get so lucky?" "I believe a horse got caught in a poacher's snare," he said against her hair. "But I like to think fate played a role." The nursery at Thornmere Hall rang with the particular chaos that only small children could create. Marin stood in the doorway, watching her husband attempt to negotiate with their 4-year-old daughter, while simultaneously preventing their 2-year-old son from scaling the bookshelf. "Rosalind, we cannot bring the pony inside the house," Corwin was saying with admirable patience. "Ponies belong in the stables. But Biscuit is lonely. Biscuit has 17 other horses for company. She's the least lonely pony in England. She told me she wants to see my room." "Ponies don't—" Corwin caught their son mid-climb. "Toby, no, we've discussed this. Bookshelves are not ladders." "Up!" Tobias declared with cheerful defiance. "Up, up, up!" Their son, named for Marin's first husband, in a gesture that still filled her with gratitude, had inherited his mother's stubbornness and his father's complete disregard for the word no. "Need reinforcements?" Marin asked, unable to suppress her smile. Corwin turned with an expression of exaggerated relief. "Your children are staging a coordinated rebellion. They're only my children when they're causing trouble. That's when the resemblance is most striking." But his eyes were warm with affection. Later, after the children were settled and the house had quieted, Marin walked to the stables. This had become her ritual, a quiet moment each morning to visit the place where everything had begun. Tempest stood in his usual stall, gray showing in his muzzle now, but otherwise as magnificent as ever. He whickered at her approach, pushing his nose against her shoulder. "Good morning, old friend." She stroked his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "The children want to visit later. Rosalind is determined to teach you tricks." The stallion snorted as if offended by the suggestion. "My thoughts exactly. Talking to horses again?" She turned to find Corwin leaning against the stable door, that familiar half-smile at his lips. Even after 5 years, the sight of him could still make her breath catch. "Tempest is an excellent conversationalist, unlike some humans I could mention." "I'm wounded." He crossed to stand beside her. "Remember when you told me he wouldn't need you anymore? That you'd be gone in a few weeks?" "I remember. Worst prediction you've ever made. Or best, depending on perspective." He pulled her close, and she leaned into his warmth. Outside, they could hear Rosalind's voice demanding that Barnaby stop eating the winter roses. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your quiet life for all this chaos?" It was a question he asked occasionally, not from doubt, she'd learned, but from wonder. Even after 5 years, part of him still marveled that she'd chosen him. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. I was surviving before, Corwin, going through the motions of life without actually living it. You changed that. This family changed that. You changed us too." His voice was soft. "Thornmere was a mausoleum before you arrived. Beautiful but dead. You brought it back to life. Tempest brought me here. I just stayed. Thank God for that." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank God for poachers' snares and stubborn widows and horses who know exactly what their masters need." Tempest whickered again, as if accepting the compliment. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the morning light filter through the stable windows. The sounds of their children drifted from the garden, Rosalind laughing, Tobias shrieking with delight, Lady Philippa's voice raised in fond exasperation. "I love you," Marin said, "wholly, inconveniently, completely." "I know." He smiled down at her. "You rode across a meadow and stopped a duel to prove it. Rather memorable declaration. Don't let it go to your head. Too late." He kissed her properly, and she felt that familiar rush of warmth and wonder that 5 years of marriage hadn't diminished. Some loves, she'd learned, didn't fade with time. They deepened, grew roots, and became the foundation upon which entire lives were built. Some stories began with grand gestures, ballrooms and declarations, dramatic rescues, and perfect timing. Theirs began with a wound and a woman brave enough to help. And every day since had been the happily ever after they'd both stopped believing in. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey. If this story made you laugh, cry, or believe in love all over again, please show your support by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing it with fellow lovers of sweeping romance. Your support means the world to us and keeps our storytelling corner alive and thriving. Stay tuned. Another tale of passion and possibility awaits at the end of this video. Click, listen, and let your heart be swept away once more.